This video contains discussions of child abuse. Viewer discretion advised.
On this occasion, he was beaten, I'd say within an inch of his life, but he was murdered that night under the care and guidance of both Maurice and Amanda.
What happened to Matthew Maison? For 7 years, this question haunted a small Michigan community. For 7 years, a 3-year-old boy's death remained unsolved while 2 people walked free, hiding behind a web of carefully constructed lies. But in April 2025, the truth finally came crashing down, and what investigators uncovered was more horrifying than anyone could have imagined. A mother and her boyfriend who allegedly planned and executed the murder of an innocent child to make room for a baby of their own. This is the story of Matthew Maison and the 7-year fight for justice that finally brought his killers to answer for their crimes. Matthew Maison was just 3.5 years old when his life was cut short in Port Huron Township, Michigan, on February 18, 2018. He should be 10 years old today. He should be in elementary school, playing with friends, living the carefree life every child deserves. Instead, Matthew became the victim of what prosecutors would later describe as systematic abuse, torture that ended in his death at the hands of the 2 people who should have protected him most: his mother, Amanda Maison, and her boyfriend, Maurice Houle. Before we continue, I need to warn you that this case involves the abuse and death of a child. Some details may be disturbing. If you need resources for reporting child abuse, I'll include links in the description below. This isn't just a story about a tragic death. It's about justice delayed but not denied. It's about grandparents who refuse to give up. And it's about how 7 years of lies can finally crumble when the truth demands to be heard. On the morning of February 19, 2018, emergency responders in Port Huron Township, Michigan, about 60 miles northeast of Detroit, received a call that would launch an investigation spanning nearly a decade. Matthew Maison had been found unresponsive in his bed by his babysitters. When first responders arrived at the family home, the little boy was already gone. According to the initial reports, Matthew's mother, Amanda Maison, and her boyfriend, Maurice Houle, told authorities that Matthew had simply gone to sleep and never woken up. But investigators immediately noticed something was wrong. The detective who first responded to the scene would later testify that Matthew had visible injuries, bruises covering his small body, and a black eye that couldn't be explained away by a simple fall or accident. Within hours, St. Clair County medical examiner Dr. Daniel Spitz performed an autopsy. His findings were chilling. In his official report, Dr. Spitz wrote, "It is my opinion that Matthew Maison died secondary to blunt traumatic injuries with features of asphyxiation. The extent, severity, and distribution of the traumatic injuries is indicative of inflicted trauma. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a tragic case of SIDS or an unexplained medical emergency. Matthew Maison had been murdered, but despite this clear determination, no arrests were made. Amanda and Maurice walked free, and the case slowly went cold as the years passed. To understand what happened to Matthew, we need to understand the toxic household he was forced to endure during the final 2 years of his short life. Amanda Maison began her relationship with Maurice Houle in early 2016, when Matthew was just 1.5 years old. At the time of Matthew's death in February 2018, Amanda would have been in her mid-20s and Houle was in his early 20s. Matthew was Amanda's son from a previous relationship. He was not Maurice Houle's biological child, and according to prosecutors, this fact would become central to understanding what happened next. During their 2-year relationship, Amanda and Houle lived together, raising Matthew in what prosecutors would later describe as an environment of systematic abuse. But to the outside world, they attempted to maintain the appearance of a normal family. However, cracks in that facade began to show long before Matthew's death. Matthew's grandfather, David Maison, Amanda's father, had become increasingly concerned about his grandson's well-being. At one point before Matthew's death, Amanda herself told her father that she had witnessed Maurice physically abusing Matthew after the toddler spilled some food. David Maison did exactly what he should have done. He immediately called Child Protective Services. But when CPS investigators arrived at Amanda and Maurice's home to investigate the allegations, something happened that would haunt the investigation for years to come. Amanda retracted her story. She claimed she had been mistaken. She denied that Maurice had ever harmed Matthew, and then she cut off all contact with her father. David Maison would never see his grandson alive again. What investigators would later discover is that this pattern of lies and cover-ups wasn't new for Amanda. It had been happening for months, possibly years. Amanda would later admit to investigators that she deliberately avoided taking Matthew to doctor's appointments because she didn't want medical professionals. Before we continue with Matthew's story, I need your help with something critical. If you believe cases like this deserve attention, hit that like button and subscribe. Every subscription helps YouTube recommend these investigations to people who need to see them, people who might recognize warning signs, people who could save a child. Share this video. You never know who in your network might need to hear Matthew's story. In the comments, drop your city and what time you're watching. This data helps me publish when these stories reach the most viewers, which means more awareness, more education, and potentially more children protected. If you want to go further, consider super thanks or join our membership. Your support funds the deep research these cases require. Court documents, investigative journalism, hours of fact-checking. This isn't entertainment, it's advocacy. And for those asking about our new series, I've just released How Ed Gein's Mother Created a Monster, What Netflix Didn't Show You. Everyone asks what made Ed Gein this way. This book answers that question by examining the religious trauma that created a killer. It's not for sale. It's a $24.99 value available exclusively as a thank you for supporting this channel's mission. Click the link in the description. Now, back to Matthew's case. Because 7 years after his death, investigators were about to make a breakthrough. Despite the medical examiner's clear ruling that Matthew's death was a homicide, the initial investigation faced significant challenges. Maison and Maurice Houle had prepared for this moment. They had their story ready. When detectives interviewed the couple in the days following Matthew's death, both Amanda and Maurice pointed the finger at each other, but in a carefully coordinated way that seemed designed to create reasonable doubt. According to the detective's testimony from later court proceedings, Maurice Houle initially told investigators that Amanda was the one who handled all discipline for both Matthew and the biological child that Maurice and Amanda had together. He painted himself as a bystander, someone who had little involvement in Matthew's day-to-day care. But under further questioning, cracks began to appear in Maurice's story. He eventually admitted that he did discipline Matthew, though he tried to minimize it. He described using what he called military timeouts, where Matthew would be forced to kneel facing a wall with his hands on his head. Maurice claimed this was a standard discipline technique. He didn't mention what investigators would later discover as 2018 turned to 2019 and 2019 turned to 2020. Matthew's case remained open but stagnant. Amanda Maison and Maurice Houle went about their lives. They separated at some point after Matthew's death, but both remained free, uncharged, while a little boy's murder remained unsolved. But two people refused to let Matthew be forgotten. His grandparents, David and Amy Maison. David and Amy, Matthew's step-grandmother, became tireless advocates for justice. They created a Facebook page called Justice for Matthew Maison, where they shared updates on the case, organized rallies, and kept pressure on local authorities to continue the investigation. And they had a tragically personal reason for their determination. You see, this wasn't the first time the Maison family had experienced an unthinkable tragedy. In May 2015, 3 years before Matthew's death, David and Amy had fought for justice for another grandchild, 5-year-old Mackenzie Maison. Mackenzie was the daughter of Amanda's brother, Andrew Maison. She had been starved, abused, and tortured by Andrew and his wife, Hillary Maison. When emergency responders found Mackenzie, she weighed only 25 pounds and was suffering from pneumonia and severe infections. She died at the hospital. Her 3-year-old sister, Michaela, was also found in the home, weighing just 17 pounds and suffering from severe malnutrition. After a 6-day trial in St. Clair County, the same county where Matthew would die 3 years later, Andrew and Hillary Maison were convicted of first-degree murder, child abuse, and torture. In March 2016, they were both sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge in that case expressed disbelief that so many people in the community had seen warning signs but had done nothing to intervene until it was too late. Now, history was repeating itself in the most horrible way imaginable. Another child in the Maison family. Another case of systematic abuse and murder. Another fight for justice led by the same grieving grandparents. David and Amy organized rallies. They held signs along Pine Grove Avenue in Port Huron, asking passers-by to honk for justice for Matthew. They met with prosecutors, reviewed investigation files, and petitioned Michigan State Police to conduct their own independent investigation. Their Facebook group grew from about 115 members in early 2024 to over 220 by April 2024. They called their supporters Matthew's Army, and they kept asking the same question. Why hasn't anyone been charged? For 6 years, the answer was silence. But in early 2025, something changed. In April 2025, the St. Clair County Sheriff's Office announced they had made significant recent developments in the case. They didn't elaborate on what those developments were, whether it was new forensic evidence, a witness coming forward, or one of the suspects finally cracking under the weight of their guilt. But whatever the breakthrough was, it was enough. On April 11th, 2025, more than 7 years after Matthew's death, arrest warrants were issued for Amanda Maison and Maurice Houle. On Friday, April 11th, 2025, law enforcement moved in to arrest Amanda Maison and Maurice Houle. The couple had been living separately by this point, and the arrests happened at different locations. Amanda Maison's arrest was uneventful. She was taken into custody without incident. Maurice Houle's arrest, on the other hand, was anything but smooth. According to reports from Detroit's WDIV, Maurice Houle became extremely violent when officers attempted to arrest him. He fought 8 different officers, injuring one of them during the struggle. It would take multiple officers to finally subdue him and take him into custody. At his arraignment hearing the following Monday, April 14th, Houle faced not only first-degree murder charges, but also 3 additional counts of assaulting, resisting, or obstructing a police officer. Both Amanda Maison, now 33 years old, and Maurice Houle, 28, were charged with 1 count each of first-degree murder in the death of Matthew Maison. They were both held without bond at the St. Clair County Detention and Intervention Center. The arraignment hearing would be the first time prosecutors publicly laid out their evidence against the couple, and what they revealed shocked even seasoned court observers. St. Clair County Assistant Prosecuting Attorney Joshua Sparling stood before the court and began to detail the systematic torture that Matthew Maison had endured during the final 2 years of his life. The military timeouts that Maurice had mentioned during his initial 2018 interview were far worse than he had let on. Prosecutors revealed that Matthew was regularly forced to kneel facing a wall with his hands on his head. While in this position, his head would be violently slammed into the drywall, repeatedly, forcefully, so hard that it would actually damage the wall itself, removing portions of the drywall backing. Both Amanda and Maurice had admitted to investigators, 7 years apart in separate interrogations, that Matthew had been abused. Amanda told investigators in 2025 that she had personally witnessed Maurice holding a pillow over Matthew's face, attempting to suffocate him. She claimed she saw this happen on multiple occasions, but did nothing to stop it. Maurice, meanwhile, maintained his story that Amanda was the primary abuser, though his own admissions about the military timeouts contradicted his claims of minimal involvement. But it was what prosecutor Sparling said next that truly revealed the depths of this couple's depravity. We came to realize of a scheme where both defendants conjured up this lie of previous injuries to the victim in our case, Matthew Maison, and came up with the lie about how the injury occurred, Sparling told the court. He continued, not to mention this plan that was put forth to kill Matthew to make room for a child the two of them could have together. Let that sink in for a moment. According to prosecutors, Amanda Maison and Maurice Houle didn't just abuse Matthew out of anger or frustration. They didn't just lose control one day and accidentally kill him. They allegedly planned his murder. They wanted him gone so they could have a child together, a biological child they both shared, without the burden of Amanda's son from a previous relationship. The prosecutor revealed another chilling detail. Before Matthew's death, Amanda had become pregnant with Maurice's child. But the couple had decided to have an abortion because they couldn't afford to have another baby in addition to Matthew. The implication was horrifying and clear. They could afford to have Maurice's child, as long as Matthew wasn't in the picture. After Matthew's death on February 18, 2018, Amanda and Maurice didn't just mourn. They didn't call for help right away. Instead, according to prosecutors, they actively contrived a plan to conceal the manner of Matthew's death from law enforcement. They fabricated a story about Matthew's injuries. They coordinated their lies about what had happened, and they spent years maintaining those lies, even when questioned by investigators. Houle's mother may have even been involved in helping them cover up the crime, according to some investigative reports, though she has not been charged. The detective who took over the case in 2025 testified at the preliminary hearing that when Amanda and Maurice were re-interviewed after their arrests, both finally admitted that they had witnessed the other attempt to smother Matthew with a pillow. In other words, they had both known exactly what was happening to Matthew. They had both participated in his abuse. They had both watched him suffer, and they had both worked together to hide the truth for 7 long years. Matthew Maison was 3.5 years old. He was entirely dependent on his mother for protection, for love, for basic survival, and she had chosen her boyfriend over her son. She had chosen the possibility of a new baby over the life of the child she already had. Following their April 2025 arrests, both Amanda Maison and Maurice Houle were held without bond as they awaited trial. The charges were severe. First-degree murder carries a mandatory sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole in Michigan. The preliminary hearings revealed the extent of the evidence prosecutors had against them. Years of documented CPS investigations. Matthew's autopsy report showing clear signs of inflicted trauma. Witness statements from family members who had tried to intervene. And most damning of all, the defendants' own admissions, both in 2018 and again in 2025, that they had witnessed each other abusing Matthew. The community of Port Huron Township was riveted by the proceedings. This case had haunted the area for 7 years, and finally, there seemed to be movement toward justice. David and Amy Maison, who had spent nearly 8 years fighting for accountability, attended the court proceedings. On their Facebook page, they expressed cautious hope but also exhaustion from years of advocacy. "The fight is far from over," Amy wrote after the arrests. "This is just the beginning." As the months passed and both defendants prepared for their separate trials, something unexpected happened. On November 5, 2025, just this past week, Amanda Maison appeared before a judge in St. Clair County Circuit Court and changed her plea. Amanda Maison formally pleaded guilty to 1 count of second-degree murder in the death of her son, Matthew. This was part of a plea deal with prosecutors. In exchange for pleading guilty to the lesser charge and agreeing to provide truthful testimony against Maurice Houle at his upcoming trial, the first-degree murder charge was dropped. During the plea hearing, Amanda made several admissions that painted a picture of the hell Matthew had endured. She admitted that she had been in a relationship with Maurice Houle from early 2016 until Matthew's death in February 2018, a span of about 2 years. She admitted that she had physically abused Matthew herself. In one horrifying detail, she acknowledged that she would push Matthew's head into the wall during these military timeouts. She admitted doing it forcefully enough to remove the backing of the drywall itself. She admitted that she willfully and wantonly allowed an environment to exist where Matthew would be systematically abused, and that those abuses eventually resulted in Matthew's death. She admitted to working with Maurice in actively contriving a plan to conceal the manner of Matthew's death from law enforcement. And she admitted that she willingly participated in the intentional concealment of Matthew's injuries to Child Protective Services and law enforcement investigations from 2016 through the 2018 murder investigation. But in her plea allocution, Amanda maintained one crucial claim. She denied committing or witnessing any violence against Matthew on February 18, 2018, the night of his death. According to Amanda's version of events, Maurice Houle was the one who delivered the final, fatal blows, and she was not present when it happened. She further claimed that Maurice had asked her to take the fall for Matthew's death to keep him out of prison, and that she had agreed to do so. Whether this version of events is truthful or simply Amanda's attempt to minimize her own culpability remains to be seen. Maurice Houle's trial, where Amanda is now required to testify under oath, is scheduled for early 2026. Following Amanda's guilty plea, her bond was immediately revoked, and she was remanded to jail to await sentencing. Under Michigan law, second-degree murder carries a possible sentence of up to life in prison. The actual sentence will be determined by the judge at a later hearing, taking into account factors like her cooperation with prosecutors and her role in Matthew's death. Maurice Houle, meanwhile, has pleaded not guilty to all charges. He remains in custody at the St. Clair County Detention Center, awaiting his trial on first-degree murder charges. Matthew Mason's case has sparked renewed conversations in Michigan about child protection systems and the warning signs that are too often missed or ignored. Multiple times before Matthew's death, concerned family members had tried to intervene. His grandfather had called CPS. Witnesses had seen Matthew's injuries. There were clear red flags that this child was in danger. Yet Matthew slipped through the cracks, and he paid for those failures with his life. In court proceedings following Amanda's guilty plea, St. Clair County prosecutor Joshua Sparling acknowledged the long road to justice. "We don't have closure yet, but what we did for Matthew," he told the Times-Herald. "I think we did right by him today. He deserves no less." The case has also highlighted the devastating pattern of child abuse within the Maison family. The fact that Amanda's brother and his wife were already serving life sentences for the starvation death of another child raises serious questions about generational trauma, learned behaviors, and whether more could have been done to protect Matthew after Mackenzie's death just 3 years earlier. At Judge Daniel Kelly's sentencing of Andrew and Hillary Mason in 2016, he had expressed frustration. "What puzzles me is how, in a community so dedicated to combating child abuse and neglect, these conditions go undetected until it is too late. Those who saw and chose to do nothing are, in my mind, equally responsible for this crime." Those words would prove tragically prophetic. Just 2 years later, another child in the same family would die under similar circumstances. David and Amy Maison, who have now fought for justice for 2 murdered grandchildren, released a statement after Amanda's guilty plea. "This is a significant step forward in holding those responsible accountable for their actions and ensuring the truth is finally told," they wrote on the Justice for Matthew Facebook page. "We understand that some may agree and others may not, but Amy and I have found peace and acceptance with this progress. It's allowed us to finally take a breath. The battle is not over, but we believe that accountability and truth will always lead the way." In all the discussions about arrests, trials, legal proceedings, and justice, it's crucial that we remember who this case is really about. Matthew Mason was a 3.5-year-old little boy who loved puzzles, who deserved to be protected, who should have had his whole life ahead of him. His grandparents remember him as a sweet child who brought joy to everyone around him. On their Facebook page, they've shared photos of Matthew completing puzzles, smiling, simply being a kid. Matthew never got to start kindergarten. He never got to ride a bike or lose his first tooth. He never got to experience any of the milestones that should have been his birthright. His life was stolen from him by the 2 people who should have loved him most. And for 7 years, they got away with it. But thanks to the tireless advocacy of his grandparents, the dedication of investigators who wouldn't let his case go cold, and a justice system that finally held his killers accountable, Matthew's story has been told. His truth has been heard. The Justice for Matthew Mason Facebook page continues to serve as a memorial to his short life and a gathering place for the community that rallied around his memory. His grandparents have ensured that Matthew will never be forgotten. 7 years. That's how long Amanda Mason and Maurice Houle maintained their lies. That's how long they walked free while Matthew's body lay in a grave, his death unavenged. But the truth, as it always does, eventually came to light. This case reminds us of several critical things. First, if you see something, say something. Matthew's grandfather tried to intervene. He called CPS. But when Amanda retracted her story and cut off contact, the system failed to dig deeper. If you suspect a child is being abused, keep pushing, keep calling, keep fighting. That child's life may depend on it. Second, justice delayed is not justice denied. 7 years feels like an eternity, and for Matthew's family, it was. But eventually, persistence paid off. Eventually, the truth emerged. Never give up on seeking justice for victims who can't speak for themselves. And finally, every child deserves to be protected. Every child deserves to feel safe in their own home. Every child deserves adults who will put their well-being first, always. Matthew Maison deserved better than the hand he was dealt, but because of people who refused to forget him, who refused to let his death go unpunished, his killers will finally face the consequences of their actions. If you or someone you know suspects child abuse, please call the Childhelp National Child Abuse Hotline at 1-800-422-4453. The call is free, confidential, and available 24/7 in over 170 languages. You can also visit childhelp.org for more resources. If this video resonated with you, please consider liking and subscribing to support content that advocates for justice and the protection of vulnerable children. Share Matthew's story. Keep his memory alive. Thank you for watching, and until next time, stay safe.